The woman who walked into Bitter Creek didn't have a name. Not one she was willing to share anyway. She moved like a ghost, her dress the color of a faded bruise, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow, as if the sun itself was a predator. The town watched her. From behind dusty glass and beneath sagging porch roofs, they watched. Mrs. Hartley, the banker's wife, saw a scandal waiting to happen. Tom Walsh, the town loafer, saw an opportunity. The children playing in the street just saw something broken. She carried a worn carpet bag that looked too heavy for her narrow shoulders. And in a town where secrets were currency, this woman was richer than anyone knew. Her destination was the Frontier Hotel, a place where stories and desperation came to die. Behind the desk sat Josiah Blackwood, a man who had soured on life long ago. His face was a permanent sneer. "I need a room," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves skittering across pavement. She pushed a small leather pouch across the counter. It made the sad, thin sound of too few coins. Blackwood didn't even look at the money. His eyes locked on her left hand. Bare. No ring. In a town like Bitter Creek, that was a confession. "We run a respectable establishment," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "House rules. No unaccompanied women." Her hand tightened on the pouch. "I can pay. I won't cause any trouble." "That's what they all say." Blackwood leaned back, the chair groaning under his weight. "Where's your husband? Your father? A woman like you doesn't travel alone." "I'm a widow," she said. The lie was well rehearsed, but it still tasted like ash in her mouth. Blackwood almost smiled. "Funny how many young widows we get through here. Must be a dangerous world for a married man." Just then, the bell on the door jangled. A man ducked under the frame, bringing the blinding afternoon sun in with him. He was tall, built of whipcord and leather, with eyes that had seen too much to be surprised by anything. This was Daniel McCrae. He owned the Circle M Ranch, a small kingdom he'd carved out of the wilderness with his own two hands. He kept to himself, preferring the company of cattle to people, but he'd seen the whispers that followed the woman down the street, and curiosity was a habit he'd never managed to break. "Problem here, Josiah." Daniel's voice was low and steady, the kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to command attention. Blackwood's demeanor changed in a heartbeat, from predator to bootlicker. "No problem, Mr. McCrae. Just explaining our policies to this lady." The way he said the word made it an insult. Daniel's gaze moved to Clara. He saw the worn-out dress, the fear in her eyes, the white knuckles gripping that carpet bag. But he saw something else, too, a spine made of steel. He'd seen that look before, in men who'd survived battles they should have lost. "Seems to me she's trying to pay for a room," Daniel said, his tone mild. "Last I checked, that's the purpose of a hotel." "You know I can't rent to her," Blackwood whined. "What would people say?" "They'd say you're running a business." Daniel's stance shifted, just a fraction, but it was enough. The air in the room got heavy. Clara watched them, a spark of hope warring with a lifetime of distrust. Kindness, in her experience, was just a down payment on a debt she could never afford to pay. "I can find somewhere else," she said, her voice small. "Where?" Daniel asked, turning to her. "The boarding house won't take you. You plan on sleeping in the livery?" Her silence was his answer. He felt something twist in his gut, a feeling he'd buried a long time ago. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. One hunted animal seeing another. He made a decision then, a reckless, stupid decision that would change everything. "She can stay at the Circle M," he said, his eyes on Clara, not Blackwood. "I've got a spare cabin. She can work for her keep." The world seemed to stop. The only sound was a fly buzzing against the window pane. Blackwood's jaw hung open. Clara stood frozen, caught between a terrible past and an uncertain future. "Mr. McCrae," Blackwood stammered, "surely you know what people will say." "I stopped caring what people say a long time ago, Josiah." Daniel picked up her bag. "Ma'am, my wagon's outside. Storm's coming. You can make your choice out there." He didn't wait for an answer. He just walked out, leaving her to follow. Clara looked at Blackwood's smug face, then at the open door where freedom, or maybe just a different kind of trap, waited. She took a breath and stepped out into the sun. The whispers of Bitter Creek followed her like a curse as she walked toward Daniel McCrae's wagon, trading the devil she knew for one she didn't. The Circle M Ranch was 5 miles of unforgiving land, and the cabin Daniel offered was little more than a shack. One room, a leaky roof, and a door with a heavy bar. To Clara, it looked like a fortress. "It ain't much," Daniel said, his first words since they'd left town. "The old foreman lived here." "I can work," she said, the words tumbling out. "I can cook, mend, tend a garden. My father had a farm." She stopped, the memory a ghost in the back of her throat. "Dawn," he said. "You start at dawn. Help Cookie with breakfast. Tend the garden. Chickens. Washings on Monday." He paused, looking at her sideways. "You know anything about treating wounds? Men and horses get torn up out here." "Some. My mother taught me about herbs." "Good. $15 a month plus board." Clara nearly buckled with relief. It was more than she'd dared to hope for. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," he warned. "The men, they're decent enough, but they're rough. Keep to yourself. Keep this door barred." He pulled a small pistol from his saddlebag. It was a .32 caliber, small enough for her hand. "Know how to use it?" "My husband taught me," she said, the words sharp as broken glass. "Good," Daniel said, ignoring the bitterness in her voice. "Any man bothers you, you tell me. Any man touches you without permission, you shoot him. I'll ask questions later." The cold, matter-of-fact way he said it sent a shiver down her spine. But it wasn't fear. For the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of something that might have been safety. Here was a man who knew the world had wolves. That night she lay on the narrow cot, the pistol under her pillow, and listened to the coyotes howl. Every sound made her jump. Every shadow was a memory come to haunt her. Sleep was a luxury she couldn't afford. The first hint of dawn found her walking toward the main house. The kitchen was ruled by a man they called Cookie, a one-legged, foul-mouthed tyrant with a heart of gold buried under layers of grime and cynicism. "So you're the stray," he grunted, looking her up and down. "Can you cook?" "I can follow orders." "Good enough. 30 hungry men want biscuits and gravy. Don't be slow." The work was brutal. Her hands, soft from weeks on the run, were blistered and raw by the time the sun was fully up. The heat from the wood-fired stove was suffocating, but there was a strange comfort in the rhythm. Crack eggs, stir gravy, flip bacon. Don't think, just work. When the ranch hands filed in for breakfast, the room fell silent. She could feel their eyes on her, a dozen pairs of them, sizing her up, wondering. She kept her head down, dishing out food like a machine. "Eyes on your plates, you dogs," Cookie roared. "Anyone makes the lady uncomfortable answers to me, then to the boss." The mention of Daniel's name was enough. The whispers died down, but the stares continued. She was a puzzle they couldn't solve. A woman on a ranch this remote was either a wife or she was trouble, and she was wearing no man's brand. After breakfast, she faced the garden. It was a disaster, a choked mess of weeds and withered plants. She tied up her skirts and went to war. Pulling weeds was like pulling bad memories from her mind. Each one a small victory. She was so focused she didn't hear him right up. "You'll kill yourself," Daniel said from atop his horse. Clara spun around, her heart hammering. "The garden needs tending. It'll need tending tomorrow, too." He swung down from the saddle and handed her his canteen. "Pace yourself. I hired a worker, not a martyr." The water was warm, but it tasted like life itself. She drank slowly, aware that he was watching her, testing her. "The men will push you," he said, his voice serious. "They'll test your boundaries. Don't give them an inch." "I understand." "Do you?" His eyes were hard. "Show weakness out here, and some men see it as an invitation." She met his gaze without flinching. "Mr. McCrae, I am well acquainted with what some men take as an invitation. Breathing seems to be sufficient for most." Something flickered in his eyes. Respect. "Fair enough," he said. He swung back onto his horse and rode away, leaving her alone with the weeds in her thoughts. This man, Daniel McCrae, was an enigma. He was hard, yes, but there was a deep well of decency in him. He offered protection, but demanded nothing in return. It was a language she didn't understand. Her father had been weak. Her husband had been cruel. Daniel was something else entirely. Something dangerous. Because for the first time in a very long time, she felt a sliver of hope. And hope was a dangerous thing to have. The days settled into a grueling rhythm. Kitchen before dawn, garden in the morning, mending and chores in the afternoon. She learned the names of the ranch hands, their habits, their quiet pains. She was careful to keep her distance, to build a wall of polite formality around herself. But at night, alone in her cabin, the ghost came. She'd wake up in a cold sweat, the phantom feel of his hands on her, his whiskey-soaked breath in her ear. Her own husband, dead and buried but not gone, never gone. The pistol Daniel had given her became her only comfort. About 2 weeks after she arrived, trouble came riding in fast. 3 horses thundered into the yard. 2 were ranch hands. The third man was slumped over his saddle, his shirt a dark, wet red. "Rustlers!" One of the hands yelled. "Jake's been shot!" Clara didn't think. She just moved. "Get him inside, on the kitchen table. I need hot water, clean cloths, and whiskey," she yelled, her voice ringing with an authority that surprised even herself. The next hour was a blur of blood and pain. Her mother had been a healer, and the knowledge came back to her now, her hands moving with a confidence she didn't feel. She cleaned the wound, dug out the bullet with the tip of a sterilized knife, and stitched the man up as he groaned and thrashed. Daniel found her there, covered in blood, calmly tying off the last bandage. His wounded man was pale but breathing steadily. "He'll live," she said, her voice shaking now that the crisis was over. The bullet went clean through. Daniel stared at her, his expression unreadable. "You did this?" "Yes. I'm sorry. I should have waited." "You saved his life," Daniel said, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. He turned to one of the other hands. "Tom, ride for the doctor. But I think Miss Clara has already done the hard part." It was the first time he'd called her by her name. Miss Clara. It sounded strange, like she was someone worthy of respect. That night she couldn't sleep. The violence had stirred up the mud at the bottom of her soul. She sat on her small porch, the pistol in her lap, watching the stars. A figure emerged from the darkness. It was Daniel. He carried a bottle of whiskey and 2 glasses. "Thought you might need this," he said, pouring them both a generous measure. "Doc says you did everything right. Jake's sleeping." They drank in silence for a while, the vast, lonely sound of the prairie filling the space between them. "That was quick thinking today," he finally said. "Not many would have kept their head." She stared into her glass. "I've had practice with blood." The words hung in the air, heavy and dark. He didn't push. He just refilled her glass, his presence a solid, comforting weight in the darkness. "You're not what I expected," he said. "What did you expect?" He considered it. "I don't know. Something easier to break." She gave a small, bitter laugh. "I've already been broken, Mr. McCrae. I'm just what's left over." "I should go," he said after a while. "Dawn comes early." He stood to leave, a tall silhouette against the stars. "Mr. McCrae?" she called out, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you for taking a chance on me." He paused. "Maybe I'm not the one taking the chances, Miss Clara." After he was gone, she stayed on the porch, the whiskey warming her belly. Tomorrow would be hard. The day after would be harder. But tonight, for the first time in a very, very long time, she wasn't running. She was choosing to stay, and that felt like a victory. But she was wrong. The trouble hadn't come riding in with rustlers. It had been there all along, hiding in the whispers of the town, in the resentful eyes of the ranch hands. And it was about to explode. The town of Bitter Creek had decided who Clara was. She was Daniel McCrae's whore. The whispers followed her every time she went for supplies, sharp and stinging as horseflies. "Living out there with all those men," Mrs. Hartley would say, just loud enough for Clara to hear. "Some women have no shame." At the ranch, things were no better. The men Daniel had warned her about started getting bolder. Their jokes got uglier, their stares more insulting. Cookie did his best to protect her. his ladle cracking across knuckles more than once. But he couldn't be everywhere. The ugliest of them was a new hand named Roy Hutchkins. He had a handsome face and a rotten soul. He cornered her one afternoon in the chicken coop. "Must get lonely out here, a pretty widow like you," he said, blocking the door. His smile was a greasy thing. "Excuse me," she said, trying to push past. He didn't move. "Some folks say you ain't no widow. Say you're running from something." He stepped closer, the smell of cheap tobacco on his breath. "McCrae's not here. It's just you and me." Clara's hand found the pistol in her apron pocket. The click of the hammer being cocked was deafening in the small space. "Step back. Now." Roy's eyes widened, then narrowed with contempt. "You won't shoot. You're all talk." "Women like me," she said, her voice deadly quiet, "have learned that the only thing standing between us and harm is our willingness to cause it. Try me." He saw something in her eyes then, something that scared him more than the gun. He backed away, spitting a curse. "Crazy witch." She waited until he was gone, then leaned against the wall, her legs shaking. This couldn't go on. She had to leave. The thought of running again made her sick. But what other choice did she have? That evening, Daniel found her packing her meager belongings into her carpet bag. "Going somewhere?" he asked from the doorway. "It's not working," she said, not looking at him. "The men, the town, I'm causing you trouble." "Who?" he demanded. "Give me a name." "It's not just one person. It's everyone." He crossed the room in 2 strides, took the dress from her hands and threw it on the bed. "You're not running. You can't stop me." "No," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "But I'm asking you not to give them the satisfaction." Was it Hutchkins? Her silence was all the answer he needed. His jaw tightened. "I'll handle it." "You can't fight the whole town for me, Daniel." "Watch me." The next morning, he called a meeting of all the hands. He stood on the porch of the main house, his face like stone. "Let me make something clear," he said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Miss Ainsworth is under my protection. That makes her untouchable. Anyone who disrespects her, anyone who bothers her, anyone who even looks at her wrong will answer to me. If you have a problem with that, collect your pay and ride out now." No one moved, not even Hutchkins. Daniel's eyes found him in the crowd. "We clear, Roy?" Roy mumbled something and looked at the ground. "Good," Daniel said. "Now get to work." It helped, but it didn't solve the problem. In fact, his public defense of her only added fuel to the fire. Now they weren't just whispering, they were sure of it. The isolation was crushing. She felt like an island with sharks circling in the water. But then, small kindnesses started to appear, like lifeboats in a storm. Rosa, the wife of one of the Mexican hands, brought her fresh-baked bread. Big Jim, the man whose life she'd saved, started leaving wildflowers on her porch. And Daniel. Daniel was always there, a quiet, steady presence, a shared cup of coffee in the morning, a nod across the crowded dining hall. He was becoming her anchor, and that scared her more than anything. Then one evening, a new rider appeared, or rather 2. Daniel, and a woman riding beside him. The woman was Eleanor Standish. Her father owned the neighboring ranch, the Rocking S, and she was everything Clara wasn't. Rich, beautiful, polished. She looked at Clara's patched dress and calloused hands with open disgust. "So this is your new employee," Eleanor said, her voice like honey laced with arsenic. "Miss Ainsworth, this is Miss Standish," Daniel said, his tone clipped. "Daddy is concerned, Daniel," Eleanor said, ignoring Clara completely. "The whole town is talking. He thinks you're losing your judgment. His offer to merge our ranches still stands. It would solve all your problems." Her eyes flicked to Clara. "And get rid of strays." "My father knows my answer, Eleanor. That was before you started collecting charity cases. She's using you. Can't you see it? A woman with no family, no reputation." "Careful." Daniel's voice was soft, but it held the threat of a razor's edge. "You're on my land." "You'll regret this." Eleanor's face was twisted with fury. "Daddy won't stand for this insult. You spurning his daughter for a nobody." "Get out," Daniel said. The words were quiet, but they cracked like a whip. Get on your horse and get off my land, and don't come back." Eleanor stormed off, leaving a cloud of dust and hatred behind her. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "I've caused you so much trouble." "This isn't about you," he said, but they both knew it was. "She's right," Clara said, wrapping her arms around herself. "I am using you. For shelter. For safety." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "My mother used to say we're all using each other. The trick is to make sure the trade is fair. You work hard. You saved one of my men. You made Cookie almost tolerable. Seems like a fair trade to me." He paused. "Unless you're planning on giving them something real to talk about." The question hung in the air between them. Clara felt a blush creep up her neck. "Of course not. Then we don't have a problem." But his eyes said something else. And as Clara lay in her bed that night, listening to the lonely howl of the wind, she knew they did have a problem. A big one. She was starting to feel something for this quiet, complicated man. Something that felt an awful lot like love. And for a woman with her past, love wasn't a comfort. It was a death sentence. The land began to die. It started slowly. A few weeks without rain stretched into a month. The creek shriveled. The grass turned to brown dust. The sun became a merciless, brassy eye in a cloudless sky. The drought had come. Clara watched her garden wither and die, no matter how much precious water she hauled from the well. But the garden was the least of their problems. The cattle were starving. Every day the hands found more of them. Skeletal figures collapsed in the dust, their ribs showing like washboards. Daniel seemed to age a decade in a matter of weeks. The lines around his eyes deepened. He barely ate, barely slept. The Circle M, the ranch he had bled for, was turning to dust between his fingers. Clara found him one evening by the corral, staring at the bone-thin cattle. "You have to eat," she said softly, holding out a plate of beans and cornbread. "Lost 12 head today," he said, his voice hollow. "If it doesn't rain soon—" He didn't need to finish the sentence. They both knew what it meant. Ruin. She stood beside him in the twilight, a silent companion in his despair. In the midst of this disaster, she had become his only comfort, the one person who didn't ask for promises he couldn't keep. One afternoon she was with him when they found a cow that had collapsed, her newborn calf bawling beside her. "Put her down," Daniel said, his face a mask of stone. The rifle shot echoed in the dead air. The calf cried out, a pitiful, lonely sound. Without thinking, Clara scooped up the tiny creature, holding it close. Tears tracked paths through the dust on her cheeks. "We can't save them all," Daniel said quietly. "That doesn't mean we stop trying." He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. The touch was brief, but it sent a shockwave through her, a jolt of warmth in a world gone cold. That night she was in the barn trying to get the orphaned calf to take milk from a bottle, when a shadow fell across the door. It was Roy Hutchkins. He was drunk. "Well, well, the angel of mercy," he sneered. "Saving calves now. You think that makes you a saint? I know what you are." He stumbled closer. "A lying whore. Your husband ain't dead, is he? No man would leave a woman like you unless he was running from you." Her blood ran cold. "You're drunk, Roy. Get out." "You're cursed," he spat. "You brought this drought with you. You brought all this trouble." The barn door flew open with a bang. Daniel stood there, silhouetted against the dying light. He looked like the angel of death. "Get out," Daniel said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Pack your things. Be gone by dawn." "Now wait just a—" Daniel's fist moved like a striking snake. The sound of it connecting with Roy's jaw was sickening. Roy crumpled to the floor. "I won't tell you again," Daniel said. Roy scrambled away, spitting blood and curses. "You'll regret this, McCrae. She'll bring you nothing but ruin." The barn was silent except for the soft bleating of the calf. "Are you all right?" Daniel asked. He was just drunk. He was right about one thing. Daniel moved closer, and her heart started to pound against her ribs. "I do want something." He reached out, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw. The air crackled. The world seemed to shrink to the small space between them. "Tell me to stop," he whispered, his voice rough. "I can't." His kiss was desperate and gentle all at once. It wasn't a demand, it was a question. And she answered it. her hands coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the frantic beat of his heart. It was a kiss of shared desperation, of finding a single point of light in an endless darkness. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. This complicates things. Everything's already complicated, she whispered back. He pulled her into his arms, and for a moment, she let herself believe she was safe, that they could get through this. The drought, the ranch, everything. Together. But as she stood there, held in his arms, Roy's drunken words echoed in her mind. Trouble followed you here. He was more right than he knew. The real storm hadn't even started yet, and when it came, it wouldn't be rain that fell from the sky. It would be blood. The kiss changed everything. There was a new current running between them, a silent understanding that was both thrilling and terrifying. They were still careful, but a lingering touch, a shared look across the room, spoke volumes. Cookie, of course, noticed. About damn time, he grunted one morning. Man's been walking around like a ghost since you got here. But the ranch was still dying. Daniel had to let some of the hands go. He couldn't afford to pay them. To his surprise, most of them refused to leave. Been here 8 years, boss, Big Jim said. Ain't leaving now. They were choosing loyalty over survival, and the weight of that choice settled heavily on Daniel's shoulders. One evening, Clara found him by the corral, his shoulders slumped in defeat. She took his hand. He gripped it like a drowning man. I'm going to lose it all, Clara. Everything I've built. You won't lose me. He turned to her then, his eyes burning with a fierce desperation. I can't ask you to stay. When this is all gone, she silenced him with a kiss, pouring all her strength, all her belief in him, into it. I've been with a man who had everything and gave me nothing, she said, her hands framing his face. I'd rather have a man who has nothing, but gives me everything. He made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into a crushing hug. They stood there as the sun set, painting the dying land in heartbreakingly beautiful colors. They had this moment, and for now it was enough. The stranger arrived on a Tuesday. He wore a black city suit that looked ridiculous in the choking dust of the ranch. He moved with a snake-like grace, his eyes cataloging everything, weighing its worth. Clara saw him from the kitchen window and felt a cold dread wash over her. Mr. McCrae, the stranger said as Daniel came out of the barn. His smile was thin and sharp. My name is Josiah Peaton. I represent certain interests back east. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket. I believe you know a woman named Clara Morrison. Clara's world stopped. Morrison, her married name, the name she had tried to bury. Never heard of her, Daniel said, his voice flat. Really? Peaton's eyes swept the ranch yard, lingering on her cabin. Because I have information that a woman matching her description is in this area. A young widow, arrived under mysterious circumstances. He paused. There's a substantial reward for information. She's wanted for the murder of her husband. The lie was so bald, so vicious, it stole her breath. He hadn't just fallen. They were saying she'd killed him. Like I said, Daniel's voice was low and dangerous now, I don't know her. The sheriff in town suggested I speak with you, Peaton said smoothly. Mentioned you'd hired a woman recently. Perhaps I could just meet her. Put my mind at ease. It was a trap. If she hid, it was an admission of guilt. If she came out, the choice was ripped from her. Clara! Cookie bellowed from the kitchen doorway. Need you out here. She had to walk out into the sunlight, feeling Peaton's cold eyes lock onto her. Miss? Peaton asked. Ainsworth, she said, amazed her voice worked. Clara Ainsworth. I've never been married. The lie felt clumsy on her tongue. Peaton studied her face. Fascinating. You bear a striking resemblance to the woman I'm looking for. Half the women in this territory look like that, Daniel cut in, stepping between them. Perhaps, Peaton said. I'll be in Bitter Creek for a few days. Should you remember anything, I'm at the hotel. He tipped his hat and walked away, his victory smug and certain. The moment he was gone, Clara's legs gave out. Daniel caught her, his arms a steel band around her. He got her inside, sat her at the kitchen table, and poured her a whiskey. Cookie made himself scarce. Is it true? Daniel asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Are you Clara Morrison?" This was it, the moment of truth. She could lie, try to run, but she was tired of running. She met his eyes. "Yes." "Did you kill him?" The question hung in the air like a hangman's noose. She told him everything. The beatings, the threats, the final terrible night. "He was going to kill me, Daniel. I knew it. I just, I pushed him. He was drunk. He fell down the stairs." Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the glass. "His neck broke. I didn't mean for it to happen, but his family, they're powerful. They would never believe it was self-defense. They'd see me hang." "William Morrison," Daniel said the name slowly. "From Denver." Her head snapped up. "You knew him?" "Knew of him. He tried to buy up some of the ranches around here a few years back. Had a reputation for being charming, right up until he didn't get his way, and for liking his whiskey and his women helpless. His eyes were hard as stone. I was young," she whispered. "He seemed like a savior." Daniel slammed his hand on the table, making her jump. "Peyton will be back. He smells blood." "I'll leave tonight," she said, her voice dead. "I won't bring this on you." "The hell you will," he snarled. The fury in his eyes was terrifying, but it wasn't directed at her. "I'm not angry at you, Clara. I'm angry that you had to go through that you've been running scared ever since. You're not running anymore. You don't understand. The Morrisons have money, influence." "Let them try," he said, his voice a low growl. He took her hands in his. "Why would you risk everything for me?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Because you're not the only one with ghosts," he said, his own voice rough with emotion. "I did things in the war, followed orders that still keep me up at night. I know what it's like to have blood on your hands, justified or not." He lifted her hands and kissed her palms. "We're both damaged, Clara. The least we can do is guard each other's backs." She broke then, the sobs tearing out of her, a storm of grief and fear that had been bottled up for too long. He held her, just held her, until it passed. "We need a plan," he said when she was quiet again. "I could sign a paper, swearing I'm not her." "Not enough. We need witnesses, people who will lie for you." "No one would do that." "You'd be surprised," a gruff voice said from the doorway. Cookie was back. "Rosa and Miguel would swear on a stack of Bibles. Big Jim owes you his life. You got people here who'll stand for you, girl. Question is, are you gonna let them?" Clara looked from Cookie's stubborn face to Daniel's fierce, protective one. After so long of being alone, the idea of accepting help was terrifying. But she was out of choices. "All right," she whispered. "We do it together." "Together," Daniel echoed. But as they started to plan, a cold fear gripped her. Peyton was just the beginning. The Morrisons wouldn't give up. They had sent a hunter, and he wouldn't stop until he'd dragged his prey back to be slaughtered. The morning after Peyton's visit, the air between Clara and Daniel was charged. The secrets were out. The danger was real. There were no more walls between them. She found him in the barn, his hands busy mending a strap. But his mind was somewhere else entirely. "I'm not courageous," she said, her voice quiet. "I'm terrified." "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Clara," he said, turning to face her. "It's acting in spite of it. You're the bravest woman I've ever met." He stepped closer and cupped her face in his hands. The pull between them was an irresistible force. She swayed toward him, and his mouth found hers. It wasn't a kiss of desperation anymore. It was a kiss of homecoming, a kiss that said, "I see all of you, the broken parts and the beautiful parts, and I'm not going anywhere." He broke the kiss, his breathing ragged. "Not here," he said, his voice thick. "Not in a barn, like you're something to hide." He took her hand and led her out into the morning sun, past the curious eyes of the ranch hands, and into his own house. It was the first time she had ever set foot inside. At the threshold of his bedroom, she hesitated. This was a line she could never uncross. He sensed her fear. "We don't have to." "Yes," she said, her voice firm. "We do." Where her husband had been brutal and selfish, Daniel was tender and patient. He moved as if she were made of spun glass, as if he was afraid of breaking her further. He taught her that intimacy wasn't about power, it was about trust, that a touch could heal instead of hurt. In his arms, she felt safe, truly safe, for the first time in her adult life. Afterward, they lay tangled together, the morning light painting stripes across the bed. "Clara," he said, his voice serious, "when this is all over," she put a finger to his lips. Don't, don't make promises about a future we might not have. Just, let's have this." His arms tightened around her. "It's going to last," he said fiercely. "I'll make sure of it." But their fragile peace was shattered that evening. A rider from the Rocking S galloped into the yard. "Message from Miss Standish," he yelled. "That Peaton fellow's in town, flashing money around. He's found people willing to say they saw your woman arrive right when he says she did." The rider smirked. "Miss Eleanor also said to tell you her daddy's offer still stands, if you come to your senses." "Tell Miss Standish my answer is still no," Daniel said, his voice cold as ice. After the rider left, Daniel gathered his most trusted men. Big Jim, Miguel, Cookie. "Peaton is building a case," Daniel told them. "Buying witnesses. We need to fight back." His smile was a dangerous thing. "Cookie, you still have contacts in Denver?" "Might do. Why?" "Because I want to know everything there is to know about William Morrison. Every debt, every enemy, every dirty secret. A man like that leaves a trail." Cookie's eyes lit up. "Now you're talking." As the men scattered, Daniel turned to Clara. "Pack a bag, just the essentials, in case we have to move fast." "I'm not running again, Daniel." "Not running me," he corrected. "Strategic retreat. But I'd rather stand and fight. Are you with me?" She looked at this man who was willing to risk everything for her. "I'm with you." "Good," he kissed her forehead. "Because tomorrow, we take the battle to him." That night, alone in her cabin, Clara felt a strange sense of calm. The fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But something else was there too. Resolve. She had spent years being the victim, the prey. Tomorrow, for the first time, she would be the hunter. Let Peaton come. Let the Morrisons come. She had found something worth fighting for. She had found someone worth fighting for. And she would be damned if she let them take it from her. The next morning, for the first time in months, there were clouds on the horizon. A storm was coming, in more ways than one. Daniel helped her into the wagon. He was dressed for town, but he wore his gun belt, the pistol sitting high on his hip. Big Jim and Cookie rode alongside them, rifles resting in their saddle scabbards. They looked like an army going to war. As they crested the hill overlooking Bitter Creek, the first drops of rain began to fall. Fat, heavy drops that kicked up little puffs of dust. Clara turned her face to the sky and let the water wash over her. It felt like a baptism, a cleansing. Whatever happened today, she was no longer the broken woman who had stumbled into this town. She was Clara Ainsworth, and she was ready to fight for her life. The rain turned the streets of Bitter Creek to mud. The town huddled inside, watching as Daniel's small posse rode down Main Street and stopped in front of the territorial courthouse. Daniel had wired an old friend, a judge from Cheyenne named Harrison, a man he said was one of the few honest lawmen left in the territory. It was a gamble. Peaton was already there, looking smug. "This is highly irregular," he sneered. "This woman is a fugitive from justice." "That," Judge Harrison said, his voice dry as dust, "is what we are here to determine. Present your case, Mr. Peaton." Peaton laid it all out. The murder, the stolen valuables. He had signed affidavits, witness statements he'd bought and paid for. It was a tidy, damning story. "And you, miss?" the judge asked, turning his sharp eyes on Clara. "What do you say?" Clara stood up. Her legs were shaking, but her voice was clear. "My name is Clara Ainsworth. But yes, I was once Clara Morrison." A gasp went through the room. Peaton's smile was triumphant. "I admit I was there when my husband died," Clara continued, her voice rising. "But I am not a murderer. I am a survivor." She told them her story, the real story, the years of abuse, the fear, the final brutal night. "He was going to kill me. I pushed him. He fell. I did not murder my husband. I survived him." A convenient tale, Patton scoffed. But you have no proof. No witnesses. Abusers don't leave witnesses, Your Honor, Daniel said, his voice a low growl. That's how they operate. And who are you? Peyton sneered. The White Knight, come to rescue the damsel in distress? Your feelings for her don't change the facts. Maybe these facts will, Cookie said, stepping forward. He slapped a leather portfolio down on the judge's desk. My contacts in Denver were very thorough. It was all there. William Morrison's gambling debts, his bar tabs, assault charges that had been mysteriously dropped, and a sworn statement from a doctor who had treated a prostitute Morrison had nearly beaten to death. It seems your victim had a habit of violence, Daniel said coldly. Peyton's face went pale. These are lies, fabrications. They are sworn statements, Judge Harrison said, his eyes scanning the documents. He looked at Peyton. Did the Morrison family know about their son's habits? Peyton's silence was a confession. The judge leaned back. It seems to me we have a woman with no history of violence and a man with a long one. She flees, yes. But given the Morrison family's influence, can we blame her for thinking she wouldn't get a fair trial? He stood up. I find insufficient evidence to charge Clara Ainsworth with murder. Case dismissed. For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then the room exploded. Peyton was shouting threats, but the judge just stared him down. I suggest you advise the Morrison family to let this matter rest before more of their son's dirty laundry gets aired in public. Peyton stormed out. It was over. She was free. Clara felt Daniel's arm go around her. It's over, he whispered. What you said in there, she said, looking up at him, about us. I meant every word. He cupped her face in his hands. I know it's too soon. I know you've been through hell. But Clara, will you marry me? She started to laugh, tears streaming down her face. Yes. Oh, God, yes. Well then, Judge Harrison cleared his throat, a small smile on his face. Seeing as I'm already here, we could make it official right now. The ceremony was short and simple. Cookie was the best man. Rosa, who had appeared as if by magic, was her maid of honor. They used a pair of simple iron rings Daniel bought from the general store. I now pronounce you man and wife, the judge said. You may kiss the bride. The kiss was a promise, a new beginning, a final definitive end to the past. As they rode back to the ranch, the rain stopped. The clouds broke, and a sliver of sun painted a rainbow across the sky. Clara McCrae leaned her head against her husband's shoulder. She was no longer running. She was home. But their victory had been too easy. The Morrisons were not people who accepted defeat, and Josiah Peyton was not a man who walked away from a payday. The real battle, the one for their lives, was just beginning. The courtroom in Bitter Creek was packed. News of the hearing, of the mysterious woman and the murdered husband, had spread like a prairie fire. But this time, Clara wasn't there as a defendant. She had asked for this meeting. She stood before the townsfolk, Daniel at her side, her head held high. Many of you have whispered about me, she began, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. You've judged me. Today you will hear the truth. From me. She told them everything, holding nothing back. The abuse, the fear, the final act of desperation that had set her free. She saw shock on some faces, pity on others. She saw Mrs. Hartley, the banker's wife, look down at her hands, a flush of shame on her cheeks. I am not asking for your pity, Clara said. I am simply telling you who I am. So there will be no more whispers. From the back of the room, Eleanor Standish let out a contemptuous laugh. A pretty story, but it doesn't change what you are. And what am I, Miss Standish? Clara asked, her eyes locking with Eleanor's. A woman who fought for her life? A woman who found love with a good man instead of trying to buy it with her father's money? Eleanor's face went white with rage. Then another voice cut through the tension. We all know what kind of woman takes up with a man before marriage. It was Roy Hutchkins, his face twisted with malice. A whore, that's what she is. Daniel moved so fast it was a blur. The crack of his fist against Roy's jaw echoed through the room. Roy went down like a sack of grain. Anyone else want to insult my wife? Daniel asked, his voice deadly calm. The sheriff dragged Roy away, and then something amazing happened. Rosa stood up and came to stand beside Clara. Then Miguel. Then Cookie stomped forward on his wooden leg, followed by Big Jim. One by one, people started to stand. The doctor, the blacksmith, even Mr. Peterson from the general store. They formed a human wall around her. Judge Harrison banged his gavel. This matter is closed. Mrs. McCrae has spoken her truth. Any further harassment will be dealt with by the full force of the law. As the room emptied, Eleanor pushed her way forward. This isn't over, she hissed. He'll get tired of you. Men always get tired of damaged goods. Is that what you think she is? Daniel asked, pulling Clara tight against his side. I think she's a survivor. I choose love over money, Eleanor. Courage over comfort. If you can't understand that, you never knew me at all. Eleanor fled, her face a mask of tear-streaked fury. Riding home, the world felt new. The rain had washed the land clean. Hints of green were already pushing through the brown earth. Life was returning. It's a miracle, Clara whispered. No, Daniel said. It's better. We earned this. That night, the Circle M celebrated. There was music and food and laughter. As the party wound down, Clara and Daniel stood on the porch, watching the stars come out. Do you think they'll really accept me now? She asked. Some will, some won't, he said. What matters is that you stood in your power. You told your truth. Standing in her power. She liked the sound of that. You haven't complicated my life, Clara, he said, turning her to face him. You've completed it. The kiss was slow and sweet, a promise sealed under the Wyoming sky. She was no longer a victim. She was no longer a fugitive. She was Clara McCrae, and she was home. But in a hotel room in Cheyenne, a meeting was taking place. Josiah Peaton was talking to a man with cold, dead eyes and a deep, angry scar running down his face. A man who had paid Peaton a great deal of money. She's married him, Peaton said. The judge dismissed the case. The scarred man smiled, a terrifying, humorless expression. The law is irrelevant. I don't want justice. I want my property back. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out into the night. And then I want my wife to suffer, for a very, very long time. William Morrison was alive, and he was coming for her. The telegram arrived a week later. It was from Cookie's contact in Denver. 3 short sentences that turned Clara's world to ice. William Morrison seen alive. Left Denver yesterday, heading your way. Daniel read it, his face grim. He played us. Peaton, the murder charge. It was all a lie to smoke you out. The blood drained from Clara's face. The ghost she thought she had buried was real, and he was coming. He'll come for the ranch, Daniel said, thinking out loud. He'll try to ruin me, to leave you with nothing and nowhere to go. No, Clara whispered, her eyes wide with a terror she hadn't felt since that last night in their Denver home. You don't understand him. He doesn't want the ranch. He wants me. The men of the Circle M turned the ranch into a fortress. They boarded up windows, posted guards. They were ranchers, not soldiers, but they were loyal. They would fight for Daniel and for the woman he loved. They waited. The days were a tense agony. Every rider on the horizon, every snap of a twig, sent a jolt of fear through the camp. Clara barely slept. She would wake up screaming from nightmares of his hands, his voice. Daniel held her, his own fear a knot in his gut. He had faced down rustlers, survived the war, battled the land itself. But this was different. This was a monster wearing a human face, coming to reclaim what he believed was his. He came at dawn, not with an army, but with a handful of hired guns, men with cruel faces and fast hands. Morrison sat on his horse at the edge of the property, a silhouette against the rising sun. Clara! His voice boomed across the valley. It was the voice from her nightmares. Come out, my dear. It's time to come home. Stay inside, Daniel ordered her. He and his men took their positions, rifles ready. McCrae, Morrison shouted, I have no quarrel with you. Just send out my wife, and we'll be on our way. She's not your wife anymore, Daniel yelled back, and she's not going anywhere. Morrison laughed. So be it. The first gunshot cracked the morning silence. The battle for the Circle M had begun. It was a brutal, ugly fight. Gunsmoke filled the air, the sound of rifles and pistols a deafening roar. One of the ranch hands went down, then another. Daniel's men were outnumbered, outgunned. Clara watched from the window of the main house, feeling helpless. This was her fault. These men were dying because of her. The pistol Daniel had given her felt heavy in her hand. Any man touches you without permission, you shoot him. She saw Morrison directing his men, moving closer to the house. He was coming for her. The front door splintered under the impact of a heavy boot. They were inside. She heard shouting, a gunshot from the other room. Cookie, a wave of cold fury washed over her. She would not hide. She would not be a victim. Not anymore. She stepped out of the bedroom, the small pistol held steady in both hands. Morrison was standing in the living room, a smoking gun in his hand, a triumphant sneer on his face. Cookie lay on the floor, a dark stain spreading across his chest. "There you are, my love," Morrison said. "Did you miss me?" He took a step toward her. She cocked the hammer. The sound was small, but it stopped him in his tracks. He laughed. "You think that little toy can stop me? I taught you how to shoot, remember? You don't have the nerve." "You didn't teach me everything," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "You didn't teach me what it feels like to have nothing left to lose." From outside, she heard Daniel scream her name. It was the distraction she needed. She fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. A look of pure shock spread across Morrison's face. He looked down at the red flower blooming on his white shirt, then back at her. He took a stumbling step, then another before crashing to the floor. It was over. Daniel burst through the door, his face a mask of fear and fury. He saw Morrison on the floor, then looked at her, at the gun still smoking in her hand. He ran to her, pulling her into his arms, holding her as the reality of what she had done washed over her. The drought was broken. The past was buried, for good this time. As Clara and Daniel stood on the porch of their home, watching the sun set over a land that was slowly, painfully coming back to life, she knew their fight was over. The whispers in town had been replaced by a grudging respect. Eleanor Standish had sold her father's ranch and moved back east. The Circle M was rebuilding, stronger than before. Clara was no longer the frightened ghost who had stumbled into Bitter Creek. She was a woman forged in fire, a survivor who had claimed her own life, her own happiness. The West had tested her, tried to break her, but in the end, it had made her whole. She had found a home. She had found love. She had found herself. And as Daniel's arm tightened around her, she leaned into his warmth, finally at peace. The night would be quiet. The ghosts were gone. There was only the future, stretching out before them, as vast and full of promise as the Wyoming sky. Thank you for joining me on this incredible journey. Clara's story is one of survival and finding strength when all hope seems lost. If her story touched your heart, I'd love to hear from you. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what you thought of Clara's incredible transformation. Your support means the world to me. And if you enjoyed this tale, don't forget to hit that subscribe button for more stories of the wild, untamed frontier. We'll see you again next time.